The skies over southeastern Nigeria were a stark, vivid orange as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a menacing glow across the land. The city of Enugu, once a hub of life and prosperity, now trembled under the weight of war. Distant gunfire crackled like thunder, blending with the soft rustle of palm trees that swayed uneasily in the breeze. The air felt charged, as though the earth itself held its breath, in anticipation of the chaos to come. In a small, dimly lit room deep within the Biafran resistance headquarters, the walls were lined with maps and plans for the coming conflict. A quiet intensity hung in the air as General Kalu, the leader of the Biafran forces, surveyed the situation. His face was drawn, eyes sharp like a hawk's, and his military uniform was stained with the grit of endless battles. The scars of history had shaped him, and now, he prepared for an even bloodier chapter in the fight for Biafran independence. General Kalu's voice broke the silence, low but unwavering, as he addressed the room full of officers. The words he spoke were not those of a man preparing for just another battle. They were the words of a leader who knew the stakes of the war ahead. His people had suffered once, and they would not yield easily. He knew the Nigerian forces had grown stronger, but he also knew that the spirit of Biafra could never be crushed. At the Nigerian military headquarters in Abuja, General Yusuf, a seasoned officer with years of combat experience, paced in front of a large map of the region. The battle for Biafra was not just a military operation to him. It was a test of power, pride, and national unity. As he looked at the map, a flicker of doubt passed through his mind. The scars of the First War still haunted the nation, but there was no turning back now. The war began with a roar. On the front lines, Biafran soldiers, their faces grim and determined, marched toward battle. The ground shook as artillery shells exploded in the distance, and the sky was torn apart by the shrieking sound of fighter jets. The Biafran forces fought fiercely, using every tactic at their disposal to resist the well-equipped Nigerian military. The clash was violent, brutal, neither side giving an inch, as the land between them became soaked in blood. Behind the front lines, families were caught in the unforgiving storm of war. Streets once filled with laughter and life now lay deserted, save for the desperate refugees fleeing the violence. Fathers carried their children on their backs, while mothers shielded their young with only the barest of supplies. The journey was treacherous, and many would not survive. The civilians of Biafra, like their soldiers, were caught in the relentless churn of history. Amidst the ruins, a small group of Biafran civilians had managed to find shelter in the dense forests of southeastern Nigeria. Here, away from the front line, they huddled together in makeshift camps. It was a place of temporary safety, but more importantly, it was a place where hope could be quietly nurtured. They shared stories of resilience and whispered dreams of a free Biafra, a dream that seemed impossible, yet undeniable in its power. As the days bled into weeks, the war only grew fiercer. The Biafran forces, though outnumbered, refused to relent. Every inch of land they held was fiercely defended, and their reputation for resilience spread like wildfire. Yet the Nigerian military, now in full force, came crashing through with an iron fist. General Yusuf's strategy was simple: overwhelm them with sheer power. Tanks rolled across the plains, crushing anything in their path. The first phase of the war had begun in earnest. Despite the overwhelming odds, Biafran soldiers stood their ground. General Kalu had ordered a strategy of guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics, attacking where the Nigerian forces were weakest. His soldiers, though exhausted and outgunned, fought with a desperation born of years of oppression. They knew this was not just a fight for territory, it was a fight for their very existence. With each battle, their unity only grew stronger. The war had ravaged the countryside, and the civilians bore the brunt of the suffering. Cities that were once vibrant had turned to rubble, and the roads were filled with the sounds of marching soldiers and fleeing families. Many villages had been decimated, and the survivors found themselves caught between the two warring factions. The struggle for survival was now the most important battle, as food and medical supplies dwindled, and the violence surged ever closer. As the conflict escalated, the Nigerian forces began to implement harsher measures, targeting Biafran civilians. in a brutal campaign meant to break their spirits. The sounds of heavy artillery shook the ground, and their raids turned entire neighborhoods to ashes. Women and children were caught in the chaos, their lives destroyed by the indiscriminate bombardment. War had become a grotesque machine, grinding down both the soldiers and the innocent. A young Biafran female commander, Captain Ifeoma, standing at the forefront of a group of civilian stern soldiers. They are a diverse group: doctors, farmers, and workers, all looking determined. Captain Ifeoma holds a rifle in her hand, her gaze steady and fierce. As the war dragged on, the mental toll on both sides grew heavy. For the Nigerian soldiers, each battle felt like a reminder of the past, of the lost lives, the scars left by the First Biafran War. For the Biafran fighters, the weight of their cause became both a burden and a lifeline. They fought not just for victory, but for the very memory of their fallen families and homes. Every moment of peace was shattered by the cacophony of war. It was a battle of endurance, of who could last the longest in the face of relentless pressure. The fighting reached its darkest stage as Biafra's northern front was overrun by Nigerian forces. Entire towns were destroyed, and the few survivors fled to the southern regions. The Nigerian army, now entrenched in Biafran territory, began to push forward with greater speed. Biafran forces were scattered, struggling to maintain supply lines and communication. It was a moment of desperate retreat. General Kalu, low-blooded and worn, refused to surrender. His resolve was ironclad. Amid the chaos, a lone ship made its way across the waters of the Niger River, carrying supplies and reinforcements for Biafran forces. This was the final hope for the eastern region. If the supplies reached them, they could hold the line for just a little longer. As the vessel sailed into the misty morning, a glimmer of possibility emerged. However faint it might be, the battle was far from over. By now, Biafra had become a fractured state, its borders constantly shifting under the weight of battle. The once proud land of hope had been ravaged by years of war, yet the spirit of resistance still burned within its people. In the scattered villages, survivors lived in a fragile peace, constantly looking over their shoulders for the next raid. Every day felt like a battle for existence. But in the hearts of Biafrans, the dream of an independent nation remained. General Kalu had not yet given up. The Biafran army, once a formidable force, was now scattered and exhausted. Supplies were nearly non-existent, and morale was at an all-time low. The northern regions had fallen, and the once proud strongholds were nothing but smoldering ruins. Yet General Kalu refused to concede. He gathered his remaining commanders in a secluded location, their faces drawn tired and hungry, but still filled with a determination that could not be shaken. In the midst of Biafra's darkest hour, a new crisis emerged. Rumors spread that a faction of the Biafran leadership had secretly begun negotiating with Nigerian forces for peace. The betrayal ran deep, dividing the Biafran people. General Kalu, upon hearing these whispers, knew that the war might be slipping out of their grasp. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he stood before his soldiers and asked them if they still believed in the cause. The silence that followed was deafening, but in their eyes, he saw the truth. Biafra would never surrender. With the Nigerian forces closing in, General Kalu knew there was one final chance for Biafra to stand. The remaining Biafran fighters, though outnumbered and outgunned, were ready for the last offensive. It would be a desperate gamble, a final push to push back the Nigerian military from the heart of Biafra's territory. The ground shook as tanks rumbled in the distance, but the Biafrans moved with determination, their hearts heavy with the weight of their mission. This was a fight not just for land, but for the soul of their nation. The final offensive erupted with an intensity that would be remembered for generations. The sound of artillery fire and the roar of fighter jets filled the air as both sides clashed with brutal force. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand in the thick mud, their faces painted with the grime of battle. The ground was littered with bodies, but the Biafran fighters pushed forward with everything they had, their every step fueled by the belief that they had one last chance to preserve their dream of independence. In the heat of the battle, Captain Ifeoma led her troops with unmatched courage, charging into the heart of the conflict. She fought with everything she had, her fierce determination leading the charge. But in the midst of the chaos, a Nigerian sniper's bullet struck her down. As she fell, the words of her late father echoed in her mind. "Your spirit is stronger than any weapon." In her final moments, she smiled, knowing she had fought for something greater than herself. The war had reached its bitter conclusion. The Nigerian forces, though victorious, had paid a heavy price. Biafra, its heart and spirit shattered, was absorbed back into the Federation, but its people were forever marked by the bloodshed. General Kalu, though victorious in his heart, stood alone amid the ruins of a once vibrant land. As he gazed out over the remnants of Biafra, he whispered, "We will never be forgotten." For though the war was over, the dream of Biafra would live on, in the hearts of those who had fought for it. Years passed, but the memory of the Biafran war lived on. The survivors, now scattered across the globe, told their stories to their children and grandchildren. They spoke not just of the pain and loss, but of the dream they had shared. A dream of a free and sovereign Biafra. And though that dream was crushed in the end, its spirit remained alive, a whisper in the hearts of those who had fought for it.